Hello everyone. So in this video, we'll find the restrictions and simplify this rational expression. So as you can see, this rational expression has a polynomial expression in the numerator and a polynomial expression in the denominator. Now, in order to find the restrictions of this expression and simplify it, we'll have to factor this expression if possible. So we have to check if we can factor the numerator and factor the denominator. So let's start with the numerator. Now in the numerator there are two terms and we can see that we can factor out the 3 from both terms and we can also factor out x squared from both terms. The first term has 3x's, the second term has 2x's. So our common factor in the numerator will be 3x squared. Now we can write in parentheses what's left over. So from 3x cubed, if we factor out the 3x squared, we are left with just x. Because 3x cubed divided by 3x squared is just x. And now in the next term, so when we factor out 3x squared from 3x squared, we are left with just 1. So that's the second term in the parentheses. So we are done factoring in the numerator. Now we have to factor the denominator. Now the denominator is a trinomial. So there are 3 terms. Now we have to check if we can do common factoring first. So common factoring is always the first factoring method we try for any polynomial expression because that helps us reduce the terms in the expression. So in this case, from the numbers 8, 12 and 4, we can factor out a 4. And we can also factor out 1x from each term because that's the lowest number of x in all 3 terms. So now we can write in the parentheses what's left over. So 8x cubed divided by 4x is equal to 2x squared. And now we have to divide 12x squared by 4x, which is equal to 3x. So we keep the minus sign and we get 3x. And next we divide 4x by 4x, which is equal to 1. So this is the expression we get in the parentheses after doing common factoring in the denominator. Now we cannot factor the numerator expression any further. So we are done with the numerator. Now we have to check if we can factor the expression in the parentheses in the denominator. Now this is another trinomial, so we can use the decomposition method to factor it. Now in order to factor it, so we'll start with the sum and the product rule. So we have to find two numbers whose sum is -3, which is the coefficient of the x term, and the product is 2 times 1, which is equal to 2. Now -3 comes from the coefficient of the x term, 2 is the coefficient of the x squared term, and 1 is the number term. We have to focus on the product to find two numbers that add to -3 and whose product or they multiply to 2. So the first two numbers that come to my mind are 1 and 2, because 1 times 2 is equal to 2. But if we add 1 and 2, we get a sum of 3. Now since we want a sum of -3, we can make both numbers negative, -1 and -2. So -1 plus -2 is equal to -3, and -1 times -2 is equal to +2. So that means these two numbers here work for us. So now we can use these two numbers to break up the middle term, because that's what we do in the decomposition method. So now we can just focus on this trinomial to do the factoring, and then we can use the factored form in the whole expression. So our trinomial becomes, So 2x squared minus 1x minus 2x plus 1. And now we can use the grouping method. So we have to pair up the first two terms and we pair up the last two terms. So from the first pair we have to do common factoring, and that's just x, and in the parentheses we are left with 2x minus 1. And from the second pair we can only factor out a negative 1 because the first term is negative, so we should factor out that negative, and there is no other number or term we can factor out, so we factor out negative 1. And then in the parentheses we are left with 2x minus 1. So when we factor out the negative 1, that changes the sign of all terms. So that's why negative 2x became positive 2x and plus 1 became negative 1. Now we can write the final factored form, and that will be 2x minus 1, which is the common term in the parentheses in both terms. And then in the second parentheses we write x minus 1. So this is this x and this negative 1 here. Now we can use this in our expression. So our expression now becomes, so we start with the numerator, which we have already factored, over, now in the denominator the common factor was 4x, and with that we write the factors we found for the trinomial. So 2x minus 1 and then x minus 1. Now we cannot factor this expression any further. Now we can find the restrictions before we simplify. So that's an important concept you have to keep in mind, that we always find the restrictions before we cancel out or reduce any of the terms. Now the restrictions are x values that make the denominator equal to 0. So the denominator now is made up of three factors. So the first factor, that's the second factor, and that's the third factor. So we set each factor equal to 0 one by one and solve for x. And those will be the restrictions for this rational expression. And then the third one is x minus 1 equals 0. Now let's start with the first factor. So 4x is equal to 0, so we can isolate x by dividing both sides by 4. So the 4's on the left side cancel each other out, and we are left with x equals 0. So that's our first restriction. Now for the second one, we have to isolate x on the left side, so we start by adding 1 on both sides. So the 1's on the left side cancel each other out, so we get 2x equals 0 plus 1, which is equal to 1. And now we divide both sides by 2, so the 2's on the left side cancel each other out, so we get x equals 1 over 2. So this is our second restriction. And now for the third factor, so we add 1 on both sides to isolate x on the left side. So the 1's on the left side cancel each other out, so we get x equals 1. So this is our third restriction. Now when we write our restrictions, we write them as x cannot be equal to, because it's a restriction. And we have three restrictions, so we list them in ascending order or from least to greatest. So 0, 1 over 2, 1. So these are the restrictions for this rational expression. Now we can simplify this expression that we get after factoring the numerator and the denominator. So we can start by cancelling out the x minus 1. So we are left with 3x squared over 4x times 2x minus 1. Now we can also cancel out one of the x's from 3x squared and 4x. So this x goes away and this power 2 becomes 1. So we are left with 3x over 4 times 2x minus 1. So this is the most reduced form of this given rational expression. So I hope you will find this video useful. Please share it, like it and subscribe to Homework Help. Thank you very much and have a nice day. Bye.